Welcome to the Unconventional Dyad podcast, where you'll find broad topics, an unconventional dyad, and one shared goal, educating ourselves through challenging and engaging conversations. Your hosts are Carli and Laura, two graduate students and friends committed to having discussions that are real, raw, and unpolished. Thank you for joining us.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to episode 7 of the Unconventional Dyad podcast. Today we talk to Dr. Valery Hazanov. Valery is a licensed clinical psychologist living in Jerusalem. He was born in Moscow and raised in Israel. He received his PhD in clinical psychology at Columbia University and trained at various organizations in New York, including Columbia University Medical Center and St. Luke's Hospital. He is a former fellow of the American Psychoanalytic Association and the Columbia University Center for Psychoanalytic Training and Research. He is also the author of The Fear of Doing Nothing, Notes of a Young Therapist. His book is a deeply moving account of his graduate training in New York City, and his book explores issues in psychotherapy with incredible honesty, vulnerability, and a healthy dose of skepticism.
We talked about a lot of different topics with Valery today. We asked him about his motivation behind writing the book, kind of the purpose and the inspiration behind writing the book. We also talked about his personal approach to therapy and working with patients. And he mentioned there being a kind of essence in therapy that resembles the relationship that one has with a priest or a rabbi or a friend. So that was a really interesting aspect of our conversation. And we also talked about how COVID-19 looks in Israel and how Valery sees the pandemic affecting adolescents in Jerusalem.
So first of all, thank you for contacting me. It's such joy, sometimes the nice thing about the book, sometimes not very frequently, right? This is not a blockbuster book until your podcast, obviously. There was before and after the Unconventional Dyad podcast, but before the Unconventional Dyad podcast, it hasn't been a blockbuster book. But sometimes I get like very moving, actually, messages from different places, India, Sri Lanka. I had obviously the States, Australia, and usually it's from people I guess pretty much in your stage of training, maybe just trainees in graduate school, and then sometimes like in your case, they tell me that it was a good experience for them, a moving experience for them, and it's truly, honestly, such a joy and the main reason for writing the book, just because I was in graduate school not that long ago and felt that there is a lack of that voice, the voice that felt to me just to tell me how it actually is, kind of thing, and I felt it's missing, and I wanted to bring that. And whenever I have a reflection from the world that says, yep, this is how we feel, I'm like, that's wonderful. That's the reason I wrote the book.
Yeah.
So about me, if you're born in Moscow, grew up in Israel, came to the States to do a PhD in psychology, lived in New York for 7 years, didn't like it. I feel like I'd be better off in Wisconsin, where you're from, but I don't know. But trained there and professionally, I did like it, personally, not so much. And I came back to Israel 5 years ago, and I live now in Jerusalem with my wife. That's about it, like kind of in a nutshell. The personal, not so personal, but sketch.
Yeah.
Personal sketch.
Yeah, I feel like you have such an interesting life, and I know Carli is also interested in knowing more about what therapy or psychology looks like in these different places that you've
Mm.
practiced. I am wondering too why you initially entered into the field of psychology. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So this is a great question, I think, that combines the professional and the personal biography. I think for a Russian man, it's a very strange choice of profession. And I think it happened. So I'm a very impulsive, not very impulsive, but a rather impulsive person. And I'm working on it. But sometimes I make the biggest decisions very fast and without thinking. So that's how I chose to study psychology. Basically, pretty much. But basically, I'm coming from a family of doctors, medical doctors, and generations of doctors. Like we're talking many generations of doctors. So as I was growing up, it was assumed that I will also be a medical doctor. But at some point during my army days, I started questioning this and started thinking, well, I'm not really a scientist. I'm not good at it. Can you be a doctor without being a scientist? Maybe I should look for something similar. And my mom is a psychiatrist, so she said, why don't you try psychology? And that's pretty much it. Like I didn't talk to psychologists before. I didn't know what it is. In high school, I was in acting, whatever, in drama class, and we had a play about group therapy, and I was the therapist. And if you would tell me then, when I was 17, that one day you'll be a therapist, I would say, of course not. What is it even? Like, I didn't know what it is, that it's a profession. So very kind of strangely, but I had some sort, I guess, of a vision of what it might be. Kind of something kind of maybe humanistic, something that kind of maybe I read in the books about, like some, I don't know, there's not a good way to describe it, but there was some hope that maybe, and honestly, my experience, which I wrote a little bit about in the second, I think, or third chapter, fourth, whatever, one of the chapters about testing, my experience was of disappointment, of deep disappointment in psychology for many years. And general kind of experience of kind of what is it? So when I'm coming from the Russian side, where I grew up, where I was born and grew up until I was 8 or so, there wasn't such a profession. There is now, but there wasn't. And in Israel, I think it's more common than in America. And people practicing. There are differences between Israel and America, but essentially Israel is not that different from, I think, America. Israel is usually a step kind of behind what's happening in America, and whatever happens, we tend to copy at some point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Valery, can you share a little bit about the psychoanalytic world in Israel and how that might be a little bit different than the US? Because from what I remember, you spent a few years in the US doing either psychoanalytic training or just psychoanalysis in general. I'm wondering what the difference looks like between the countries.
Yeah. So I wouldn't know actually, because after my training, I haven't been part of any institute or anything. I don't know. It's too hard for me, honestly. Like it's too much. Mm-hmm. In New York, I really enjoyed the Columbia Psychoanalytic Center, which is probably my favorite place in the psychology or therapy world. In Israel, there's, similarly to the US, there are relational institutes. There is like a Buddhist, Eastern influence psychoanalysis a little bit. The same as in America. There's a more classic Jerusalem one. So in terms of differences, I don't know. I feel like it's pretty similar in vibe, but I haven't really explored it that much, I have to say, honestly.
What about more broadly speaking, looking at the kind of therapy or the training you received in the United States? Do you notice any differences between the way psychology is performed in the US versus in Israel?
So it's a great question. I think psychology is performed differently in Wisconsin and New York. I would imagine, I would guess. I think in Wisconsin, it's probably more pragmatic. I don't know, on average. I don't know. I feel like people in Wisconsin are more pragmatic than New York, and they get shit done. New York, it's like, why do things? I don't know. So I think my sense is America, in some ways, was a more open place to new things. Like, for example, when I came back here and I worked for a moment in Tel Aviv University, like with students, there was like a question whether we should study CBT, right? It's a very dynamic kind of place. And, in America, I feel like you don't ask those questions in graduate school anymore, right? This is like a question for 60s or 70s or maybe slightly even before. Like, it's clear that you need to study some more kind of, I don't know, let's call them pragmatic approaches to therapy. And whether you choose to do it or not, I mean, up to you. But clearly, like nowadays, what, you're going to finish graduate school without knowing anything about DBT or CBT, the third wave? Of course not. And I think it's a mistake not to do it. I think you need to know as a therapist, like you need to learn those things about people in those terms. And in Israel, I think it's still a more dynamic place, and I feel like in many other ways, it's a generation behind America. So we're probably the states where, I don't know, in the 80s, maybe 90s, New York was, not New York. So kind of like questioning the value of something that's not dynamic, like just the value of it. And, now I'm working at Headspace, which is a short-term focused therapy kind of place, evidence-based, And I think it's difficult for therapists because we have 15 sessions with clients, with patients, which is not a lot. And it's a big adjustment for, I think, therapists who trained in in Israel, to kind of think of therapy in those terms. Like, how can anything work in such a short time at all? So, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your book, The Fear of Doing Nothing. You started talking a little bit about your decision to write the book. Can you dive a little deeper into that? What was the motivation or the inspiration behind it?
Sure. I think I remember, first of all, I was going through a lot, like just personally. I had a very difficult time in New York. I got divorced in New York. I felt it was very raw, I think, at the time in my life. Still is, obviously, I mean, for most of us, but I hope not as much as it was then. So it was pretty raw. And sometimes from that, you try to figure out yourself, like whatever, what you're doing. And I think I began thinking about the book in my second year of graduate school, when I was, I think, around there. We had a seminar, clinical seminar, which I guess you guys also have. And during that seminar, I started thinking that I would like to write a book about my experiences in graduate school, because, I don't know. Then I thought, like, I have like snapshots that I remember, like where I thought about it pretty much first, like in the notes I took, and then I have a friend with whom I discussed it in a coffee place close to where we used to live there in the Morningside or Upper West Side. And so I wasn't sure how to approach it. Like, first I thought, let me talk about my experiences. Like, let me talk about like interviews to internships or externships or whatever. And I don't know, like just like I'm the quote unquote hero of the book. Like, so I'll tell about my experiences. And then I felt like, who cares? Like, it's so boring to people. Like, the only thing that might interest people maybe is the patient's life. They're so much more interesting than mine. So kind of I made a conscious decision to be a little bit on the background, which I think I imagine you would agree that I am at the background. And so that's kind of the initial. So, but the idea was to let me just talk about what I experienced in the room, because there was such a dissonance between the way therapy was presented, written about, and the way I just felt doing it, because it was just completely different. And I've never, or I wouldn't say never, but I rarely read something that resonated in terms of experience, right? I read many things that were very interesting, like as theories from many different worlds, like from affect research, neurological stuff, obviously dynamic theory. There are many things that I really liked, but not too many like case, I think, presentations or examples that. So that was it. And then I think I wrote an article with the same name that got published. It was a little bit different, but so it was in my mind and for years. And then I think I started writing it in my internship year. And it took me 5 years to write the book, which is, as you know, a very short book, but it took me 5 years to write it here and there. I used to write it on the weekends. But the idea was to, I think the main idea, and I think this is, my voice, quote unquote, in the therapy world, is try to be as realistic as you can when you describe what's happening. And from that place, try to describe what maybe you're giving, not from a jargony, detached place. That's was the attempt.
Before we started recording the episode, we were talking of this idea of professionalism. And
Yes.
Something I really appreciate about your book is you do take risks. You are vulnerable. And when I first started training, I saw that those parts of myself that really wanted to be vulnerable, I saw that as very unprofessional. Like I shouldn't be sharing what my thoughts are about patients. I shouldn't be sharing how I'm feeling about my patients. And over the last few years, I'm like, maybe it isn't all that professional to share that, but I think we have to. And something that I really appreciate about your book is your vulnerability, your willingness to take risks. And I surely got a lot out of that, reading that, kind of witnessing your stories and your patient stories. And I just really view therapy and just training in general very differently now.
Wow. This is like the best thing I can, it's very moving, honestly, to hear you say this. Honestly. I don't know. I think there's always a balance between going full on like humanistic, being just yourself in the room, and this is it. Like forget about like any theory, and between that on the one hand, and on the other hand, trying to think about what's going on with a certain detached lens. I think somewhere there lies the attempt, but. I don't know. I really believe in like authentic, genuine, vulnerable stuff in therapy. I think research in some ways also believes in that. I think when you think of common factors in therapy and what actually works beyond the like models and the new therapy that, we're learning about every week. When you actually like, and some people like Bruce Wampold, Tony Rosmanier, I don't know if you know, these names are actually researching it and thinking about it deeply. And I really appreciate that kind of wave of thinking of the common factors approach that basically says that beyond the theories, beyond the techniques, there are certain things that work in therapy. And definitely one of the main ones is genuine, authentic, caring approach to another person. I think it's an open question to me whether therapy can actually be much more than that. Maybe yes, maybe not. It used to scare me, I think, before, like right in the beginning, maybe this is it. Like, oh my God, this is like talking to a friend, right? Like, oh no, I'm investing my life in like, why just... Now I don't know if it's true. I think it's not like talking to a friend. It's not fully like talking to a friend. We can maybe talk how it is different, but even if so, like I'm not, like it wouldn't demean it for me. It wouldn't diminish it. Okay, so it's like talking to a friend. So what's wrong with that? Or talking to a priest or to a rabbi. which is much more like, so what if it's like that?
Mm-hmm.
What if we are serving that function? I don't know. But anyway,
I think that
I feel in those
probably,
podcasts, I have to just say that in those podcasts, like afterwards, I heard myself also. It's like your monologues are so long, man. Like so I have to stop myself. You're very gentle and kind of nice to me, but yeah, stop and talk.
no, that's actually what we typically hope for in our episodes, is that the guests will just keep talking. We kind of want to see where it goes. So you're doing exactly what we were hoping for.
Okay, I'm happy to hear. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think that would scare a lot of professionals to just think about therapy as talking to a friend or talking to a rabbi or talking to a priest. I think that would be scary for a lot of people who really take this profession very seriously. I guess, where does your acceptance of that potential reality come from?
It's a great question. Well, I think that over time, I came to view therapy more like talking to, and I'm not the only one, by the way. Right, there are other people who. So if we're comparing talking to a doctor versus talking to a priest, let's say, or rabbi, or like a religious authority, I feel it's more the latter than the former, for me at least. I don't think it's like that for everyone, by the way. I don't think I'm saying something about therapy, kind of capital T. This is the reality. Now Valery is telling us what it is. Really not. But for me, I think it's more the kind of the religious, not the medical. Why or how I came to think that way? First of all, but I used to, like, when you read stuff from, I don't know, I gave this example in the book, The Grapes of Wrath. And I don't know if you guys read it, but there is this character that is like dying to talk to someone, right? And I think that function before psychoanalysis and before therapy and maybe even before modernity was filled by a religious authority, whatever the religious, shaman, rabbi, priest, doesn't matter. And, and we can think of examples in literature. One of the main ones, the significant ones, is Father Zosima and Brothers Karamazov of Dostoevsky. Like the again, I don't know if you guys read it, but the idea is that you come with deep pain to someone who you think knows things that you don't. A, B, has authority, in this example, a divine authority, which we obviously don't have. And from that position, understands you potentially, and also tells you something that kind of makes order in your world, and kind of makes, okay, this is why I'm suffering. This is what I need to do, suffer less, basically, essentially, right? And it's not exactly medical, but it might alleviate some existential crisis, or just like gloom and depression in some ways. So on the one hand. On the other hand, I think we do know a lot from psychoanalytic theory and from research about how people, like, I don't know, what's social anxiety, right? What are the symptoms and how it looks, right? Which, I don't know if Father Zosima knew about social anxiety, probably not, or maybe he had a different term to it, but we now know. Does it make us more doctors knowing it? Doesn't? I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like, it's an open kind of process for me. But I don't think also it's either or, but it's closer to me to those. And maybe it's my wish as well, right? Not the divine aspect of it, but just to be like this. if someone is so lonely and desperate and depressed and angry and I don't know what, and to be that person to him that just kind of comes there and makes it a bit easier for that person, regardless how we call it, regardless how we understand it neurologically or in terms of symptoms or whatever. It just, you know what, at the end of the day, it feels much more appealing to me, much more beautiful at the end of the day. I think maybe that's the reason why I'm more leaning towards it. I guess that's the reason.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I noticed for me, I went through a very similar process that I think you're describing. When I first started in my training, I was pretty defensive. I was kind of going throughout my day being pretty defensive. I think a lot of that was driven by kind of this pretty significant insecurity that I really wasn't sure what I was doing. And I think what
you mean defensive in sessions, like with patients?
Just kind of even in class, like feeling like I had to know everything. If I didn't know something, there was something wrong. And this process unfolded very similarly that you're describing, where just being with another person can really make a whole lot of difference and really shape the way that I kind of approach therapy. In your book, I mean, there were so many situations and stories that you described where the change happened within the relationship. And, theory, you may have still been thinking about it, but the change happened just from, being with that other person, and kind of how those stories unfolded were very just relational, and you had this understanding that you're just with another person.
Yeah. And you know what, somehow, I don't know, like, that's also not enough for me, right? Like, I'm so problematic because like at the end of the day, like just like being with someone that also feels not enough. So then I'm jumping all the time between those things, because then I'm like, wait, let me learn something about anxiety, actually, like me, or depression, or bipolar, or psychosis. Let me read some research about this. No way, like there's only like sitting, like no way. Like, so I'm always jumping between those poles still, and I think forever jumping between those. I do think that what's more healing is that like special whatever sauce of getting someone in front of you and like really like digging it and also just providing a lot of care. Also, like, I don't know if when you Googled my name, I don't know if you read it, but I wrote recently like a small thing about, the title was, Am I Becoming a Worse Therapist? The answer, I think, is yes. And one of the reasons is because I became a little bit more confident than I used to be. And I think that position of like being so insecure, like at Headspace, I see most of the therapists that I work with. I'm the director, so like, and I don't work much, but I have therapists to work, and the therapists who have that like insecurity, I think they are the best. They're coming in, they don't know what they're doing. They're like, oh my God, I said the wrong thing. Like, right. And like, and he won't come again. That vibe, that energy, I think is a very, very therapeutic energy, because you're thinking about the other person. You're not sure. The moment you start being confident, I think you're like, I got this. Like, I know how to, That's the moment, I think, when you start losing patience. In my experience, it actually literally happened. And whatever. So, complicated stuff, huh?
It actually happened to you?
What happened to me is, I think, what I wrote about in this piece of Am I Becoming a Worse Therapist is it dawned on me like a year and a half ago or something like that. In my private practice, there was a woman who came to see me, and then she left like prematurely a little bit, and which didn't or had not happened often. And it all of a sudden happened, because usually like people stayed with me, and then I was like, okay, like you're doing something. And then I thought like, and I think she had a good reason, because I was trying to hammer down like something that I thought I understand about her, and she wasn't taking it. Like, I think it wasn't helpful to her, whether it was right or wrong. She just didn't resonate with her. And I think I became too confident in like my approach, which is whatever that is, but kind of this blend of like just being real, quote unquote, and and the more kind of humanistic, I don't know how to call it without sounding a cliche, but like something like that. I used to pride myself on people who are coming to me after seeing many therapists, and then they're coming to me, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to talk to you like a therapist. I'm going to talk to you like a human being, and that's what's going to work. Okay, so guess what? I think like life is a humbling experience. Psychotherapy is a very humbling experience. And what's so nice about it, right, is that you can be a trainee and people will stay with you and will think that you're an amazing, at the end of the day, after they're like, stop questioning who you are and your credentials, they will really connect to you and stay with you, and it will be significant. And you can be a professor of psychotherapy who wrote 20 books about psychotherapy, and the client will come and then will go away. I think there's a lot of honesty in that, right? I think at the end of the day, I mean, they do care maybe initially about your credentials, but not I think after a while. And I felt that kind of, it was a bit of an awakening moment that I became a little bit confident in my approach, like a little bit. So, which is, I think, a great, kind of lesson from God to just be more humble and just kind of relax. You're actually not a big deal. Like, don't you for a moment think that you got it. You don't understand what therapy is. You need to be much more humble, which I think is much more therapeutic as a position.
You know, one thing that's really remarkable about you, Valery, is just how honest you are and how willing you are to expose yourself and your own mistakes and your own shortcomings. And you do that a lot in your book. And I'm wondering what it was like to publish such a personal and vulnerable account, and just what it's like for you to even share so many personal experiences on things like a podcast.
Right. The Unconventional Dyad podcast. Great name, by the way, of the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I don't know, it comes naturally to me. I think it's really not. I'm not saying that it's fake humility or something like that, or I'm not trying to be. I think it's just the way I roll, kind of like, this is it. And it's not always great, let me tell you. And it has a lot of, I think, obviously paying a big price. Whatever, we all pay a price for who we are, constantly. And I don't know, like with it's hard for me to say. I think it's just, it's not fully conscious. I think this is just kind of characterological in a sense, which is just how I'm trying to kind of be. But it's not a great effort, kind of for me to be, okay, I'll work on myself, and after 20 years of analysis or 5 years of analysis, now I'll be honest. It's really not. It's just kind of the way I roll, or try to. But in terms of publishing it, it never concerned me. And I have to say, and this might sound arrogant, but I think it is a sign of some confidence when you're allowing yourself to say, I screwed up here big time. Like, I really, really screwed up. I don't know how, but I felt like probably maybe confident enough to do it, because if I truly felt that I'm not doing anything and I'm this terrible, horrible therapist that never helps anyone, right? I don't think I could have published that book. I don't think I would publish a book, but I did think that therapy is not nothing, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't. So I felt like compelled to say it as it is, but I don't know. One of the best compliments I got about the book, one of my favorite ones, is that my friends, which is pretty much, except you guys, everyone who read the book, right? My mom, my friends, a couple other people. So my people who know me, essentially, they said, it's so funny reading it. It's like talking to you. And I always took it as a great compliment, because this is what I try to do. It's just like talking to me, like I try to kind of convey that anyway. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the reason I'm so fascinated by your honesty is because I haven't seen a whole lot of it in our field, and maybe it is just Wisconsin. I don't know. Maybe it's the
no.
United States, but I feel like there's almost a need for psychologists and therapists to put out this ultra professional, ultra competent, persona out there. And it's really refreshing when a psychologist doesn't do that. I mean, I think the reason Carli and I resonated so much with the book is because it felt like you were talking about things that we were going through that we were too afraid to basically admit that we were going through. So.
Well, again, it's honestly very moving for me to hear that. I'm not just using that word, it really is, because that's the idea, right? That was the idea of writing it. Like, I felt that this cannot be only me. Like, it's not just only me. Like, other people also feel that way in graduate school.
Right.
No way, I'm the only one. So hearing it from you guys is very, it's very significant. And thank you so much for this, because it really was the idea. I don't know, I'm always a little bit of an outsider, I think, in general. Like, also my biography, as you've asked in the past, like, I was like, I'm not from the States. I didn't grow up here. And here I'm not from Israel fully. Like, so I'm always like a little bit watching things from outside, and maybe from someone. And that's also my position, again, like with the honesty. Like, I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing, but I'm always like a little bit from the outside watching it. And I think when you do that, it's a little bit easier for you to kind of say, well, kind of, I don't know, like, that's how I felt about this. It's a bit different. Yeah, not with great effort, I think, but just like it came pretty naturally. But it was at some point, this part was a conscious choice. Like, the conscious choice was, let's try and just really describe how it is, what a session looks like, what a I don't know, therapy looks like, a little bit, as to the best of my abilities. Let's describe how I felt it is, and not how it's written about, because I don't think it's true. We can ask ourselves why there is this jargon and professionalism. I think early on, for students, definitely for me, it was insecurity, right? You were like, of course, this is me as a psychologist. It's not only bad. I think there's also something a little bit nice about it, like about like putting a persona like that. But ultimately, I think it's a failure. And I think the best therapists, I think the best ones, the ones that really, really like touch their patients and are creating significant change, are real human beings in the room. They're very similar to the way they're outside of it. Of course, with boundaries, of course, with not like, right? But essentially, the essence of them, I think, really comes through. And they are really concerned in trying to reach the people in front of them. That's why I really think the trainees are wonderful therapists, frequently much better than the established, esteemed professors or whatever. Not always, of course, but I think frequently, yes, because of that quality of that reaching, like, I'll do anything to kind of help you. And I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm really going to try now really hard. I think that's the essential therapeutic element of change, I think.
Yeah, you've mentioned your approach a little bit. You've kind of described your approach a little bit. I know in the book you tried to stay away from kind of claiming a theoretical approach. You were pretty critical of different theoretical approaches and you questioned them. I wonder if you have subscribed to one, or if you feel like you do now fit into a mold, or if you're still kind of sitting back and taking what you can from all different orientations.
Right. I jokingly said it in the book, and ever since, whatever works, that's my theoretical approach. And I think different things work differently for different patients. I think that some people need very concrete and, let's say, behavioral, cognitive, pragmatic approaches. That's just how they think about the world. And if you come to them in a analytic kind of pretense, in a sense, and try to kind of, I think it's it's an empathic failure. Like, this is not how they think of themselves. Like, this, you want to connect to them. I think it's not going to work. And some people need like a dynamic, deep interpretation about what's up with them. And some people need a systemic, whatever. Like, I think different people need different things. The challenge becomes how to integrate between all of them. I don't know. I think it's very difficult. So I definitely don't see myself as a therapist, a something therapist. Always trying to kind of search for what feels to me at the moment. And also, like, during the same treatment, I feel like I used almost always different things. Like, and that I think I did mention, like, I'm almost always will use some things from generally the CBT world. Like, almost always will think about it. And almost always will think about something dynamic about the person that I'm like. I don't think they negate each other. And also, like, I will tell stories about, I don't know, my life or not my life, but just maybe anecdotes that pop into my mind, or some imagery that I have. Like, why not? Like, I don't know, like, it's all going to be there in a blend. And I think, to be honest, most people, that's how therapy looks for them. At some point, like, even the ones who claim that they are XYZ, I think essentially their therapy is, if it's a good therapy, it looks similar. I think it's just different things that you're trying to give person. Granted, there are people who are prescribed to some models, but research shows us that prescribing to one model is just not effective. Like, I think it's actually research from Wisconsin. Bruce Wample, I think, is in Wisconsin. So he's a great researcher. Like, and I think at least he and his colleagues in that world show that it's just not that effective. All these wars, something else is effective. What is effective? Those common factors. What are the common factors? Caring, understanding who's in front of you, being able to succinctly verbalize like a complex situation and communicate it to another person. Some charisma, I guess, as well, which is, some people have it, some people don't. And prescribing to one theory is I think helpful, but it doesn't matter which one that much. Like, that's the joke. So I don't know. I think modern therapists, like 2020, we need to know, like, different things. Like, we can't, like, we're not going to study like behavioral approaches to therapy. Come on, we're not going to read like Stephen Mitchell and like relational psychodynamics. Of course we will. Like, why would you, how could you not? We're not going to study at all like human development and like different stages a little bit to understand them. Like, what's a teenager, like, generic, like, we're not going to study like cultural approaches to therapy and to think like of identity. I mean, we are. So, but the blend is very difficult, very, very difficult. I know. Something like that.
If it's okay, I'd like to pull us out of this conversation just for a little bit. I'm really wondering, what is the pandemic looking like in Jerusalem? And how do you the pandemic, COVID-19, what is that looking like there? I'm imagining it being very different than it is in Wisconsin right now. And how do you see your work changing over the last 6 months?
That's what I've been asked today on the Russian TV. As I told you before. Listen, I love Jerusalem. That's the truth. I love Israel, not like in a Zionistic, nationalistic kind of way, but I just like to hang out here. It's just my vibe a little bit. And I think people are much less anxious than in America in general, and about the corona as well. The risk of that is that, people are not taking the precautions they need, and we have like the corona rates are through the roof. I've been asked several times in the last months, because of my position, which is so I'm the director of a clinic that sees several hundred people a year, like teenagers. So I'm supposed to have some idea, which I don't, about like what's the state of the teenage emotional well-being. I haven't, like, I don't know. Ask them. I don't know. Like, seriously, I don't. It's not my kind of thing. But we did try to understand, the staff and I, and in general, like how did it affect? And I think on what's going on with Corona in mental health, let's say, in general. I feel like there is kind of almost like a sense of gloom a little bit, like kind of everyone is a little bit like. But if you ask me, like Valery, what's the effect of the pandemic on your well-being? I think zero at the point, right at this point. And I'm fortunate enough not to have it and not to die from it or not to be like whatever. My wife, by the way, is an ICU nurse who works in Corona. So she tells me stories.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's one of the busiest in Israel because it hit very hard the Orthodox community, and many of them live in Jerusalem, and they get to her hospital. So I don't know. I think it's hard for me to generalize, like, it's more on the political scale in Israel. I think that it's felt, and I think here is similar to the States. There's a lot of mistrust about what the political establishment tells us. I think from everyone, like it's in Israel, like no one believes anyone. Like there is a sense that the bigger game is going on. Like people are not really concerned about like health and so on, but there is a political, like, if any decision is first and foremost questioned by the political ramifications of it, and it's always suspected in the background, I think, by everyone. That is a bit unfortunate. I think there is no sense of a goodwill between, I think, the government and the citizens. I think that's the main thing. And in terms of like well-being, let's say, of teenage, I think it's complex. I don't know. I think maybe some people are more lonely or isolated. Not maybe, definitely. But for some, it's actually an escape from the terrible miseries of school, let's say. I think, like, I see it in minimal stuff. Like, people hate Zoom and like, oh, they're tired of it. Okay. But not like in the big yet. Maybe it will come, and everyone is talking in apocalyptic terms about the mental health crisis that's coming. I'm not sure it's going to be that way. I don't know. I think obviously the economic might affect it very much, and I think it will. But I'm somehow relatively optimistic about this. Like we haven't seen at Headspace like a huge difference. I don't know. We'll see. What terrible expert. Quote unquote expert.
Are you still seeing patients?
Yes.
Either in person or virtually?
Yeah, both.
Okay.
Yeah, we're still allowed. We're allowed and we're not allowed. Yeah, I have a private practice in Jerusalem. And at Headspace, I almost don't see anyone. I have like one person that I'm seeing there now. Okay. I'm just like from time to time I take on a patient there, but typically not. In my private practice, I see, and I also Zoom. Like I have also the clients abroad as well, in like America. Typically, I have like a couple.
Wow.
I'm Zooming with them.
So you've been doing that before the pandemic?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I was curious about your thoughts on virtual therapy, but it sounds like you're pretty seasoned in it.
Nah, I'm not seasoned in it. I don't love it.
Yeah.
But I think it works. I have people with whom I met initially online. I think it works. I think you create a relationship. I think for the most part, I think it works. It is nicer to see someone like it in person. Just nicer. I don't know if it's more effective. I'm sure there's going to be research about it.
Yeah.
but it's just a nicer feeling. But I don't know. So, but I don't feel like well, we'll see, right? I mean, it's easy for me to say because I kept my job. Like if I would lose my job, I would feel like much. I'm really feeling for those people, and obviously people who are dealing with it health-wise. But I don't know. I think Jerusalem is as usual a pretty strong emotionally place as a whole. With everyone suffers, but on a whole, the vibe is pretty, I think, positive.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Great. We have one more question for you before we wrap up today. So this podcast is really focused on learning, and it's focused on educating ourselves. So with that in mind, can you think of one lesson, either in your personal or your professional life, that you learned this past year, and what kind of impact that lesson has had on you?
Wow, that's a big question. Let me think about it for a moment.
Sure, take your time.
And we are catching you pretty late your time. It's about 2 o'clock our time, but we do recognize that it's pretty late over in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So.
No. I'm not gonna escape through that route and not answer a question and saying, "Oh, I'm so tired." No, I want to think for a moment about this. I think it's a great question. I think it's a wonderful question. I just need a moment to think about it. Well, at the risk of being very honest, I married this year, remarried. This is my second time.
Mm-hmm.
After a very brief time, kind of dating, whatever. And we married very fast. I think we're both in our 30s. So the biggest lesson must come from there. I don't know. I think it's a relationship is for me like the struggle, I think, or the I don't know, the challenge of a relationship, because consciously I understand that to live a happy life with my wife, I need to like nullify, or I don't know, diminish my needs and wishes as much as I can in some ways, right? To really see the other person. But then what happens when you have your own ego and stuff, and I think that to me is a process, the main process, I think, this year, how to find the right balance between kind of the narcissistic needs that you're trying to fight, and yet we want stuff from life, and being able to kind of give the other person what they need when it's something, I don't know, something like that. Mm-hmm. That's the one thing. The other thing, if I may, is just professionally. It's the first time I'm managing a team of therapists. I think, yeah. So it's been a very interesting challenge, how to do it, like pure managing thing, like how to lead a group of people. Completely not straightforward for me, really. It's just and I guess both of them, the first one and the second one, have to do with empathy and how to get into the head of another person without losing who you are. right? I mean, that's the thing here, which is very, very difficult. So I'm, trying my best. Sometimes succeeding, sometimes completely failing, something like that.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I just recently celebrated my first wedding anniversary.
Oh,
So
congratulations.
thank you. And congratulations on your marriage. I completely
Thank you.
understand what you're speaking about. I think being in a marriage is one of the most transformative experiences you can have in life. And I've learned a lot about myself in this past year. So I can relate to that.
Cool. Yeah, congratulations. Wonderful.
Thank you.
We had a nice Tel Aviv December wedding before it got
Nice.
shut down. Yeah.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah.
Before Corona.
Nice. Great. Well, Carli, did you have anything else you wanted to ask?
Not any questions. I just really want to thank you for spending some time with us today. I know that we were really looking forward to having you on, and I'm really happy we got the chance to speak with you. And I hope that our listeners got a chance to really hear your story. And personally, I feel like stories are really important. That's part of the reason why we're doing this podcast, is to kind of get outside of ourselves and hear other people's experiences and stories. So I really want to thank you for being open with us and sharing some of your story. And I really enjoyed my time today. So.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. Thank you for doing this. It's very exciting, and what a great kind of venture you're having of this podcast and trying. As I said, like it was very nice, kind of to hear what you thought about the book, and the fact that it resonated with you is very, very meaningful to me. So I feel like you gave me a great gift. Thank you very much, and I wish you a great continuation of graduate school.
Thank you. This episode of the Unconventional Dyad podcast is sponsored by Anchor. Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. The most important thing about Anchor is that it's free. They also have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. What were your thoughts on the interview, Carli?
I noticed myself really wanting to sit back and just listen to what Valery had to say. I found myself just wanting him to keep talking, because I think that he has such a very unique view of just therapy and kind of what he sees his role being.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really appreciate what he was saying. And I wanted to just kind of ask for more, because I really enjoyed what he was talking about.
Yeah, I agree. He has such a warm presence too. And even doing this interview virtually, I could feel that presence. And I know you did too, because we talked about it and just how warm and genuine it was. I mean, he definitely made us feel comfortable in this virtual space that we were using to conduct the interview. And just, he put me at ease, honestly, even starting off the interview with him trying to help us figure out our technology issues. I mean, I think his presence is so warm and genuine, and I really appreciate that. And the fact that it comes across in a virtual space is incredible to me.
Mm-hmm. Something that I really wanted to ask, but I wasn't sure if it was my place, was I'm just kind of curious what your experiences are in terms of just coming to the US and kind of experiencing something very different than what you were used to. And I'm wondering if that was at all similar to maybe what he was sharing with some of his experiences in the US.
Yeah, he talked about being an outsider, and I wanted to ask him about that a little more. We just didn't have time for it in the interview, but he mentioned how he's kind of felt like an outsider for most of his life. He was born in Russia. He lives in Jerusalem. He, has never really been fully immersed in the Russian culture in the way that an individual from Russia living there would be. And he doesn't fully feel, maybe at home in Israel, although it sounds like he loves it a lot over there. So I could kind of relate to what he was talking about in terms of being an outsider. I think I've felt similarly, feeling like I'm not, I was born in Romania, but I'm not Romanian enough. I've lived most of my life in the United States, but I'm not American enough. So kind of taking on this outsider lens and looking at others and your surroundings through that lens, I think that's really interesting. And I wish I could have asked him more about how that impacts maybe his therapeutic approach.
Mm-hmm. I'm still reflecting on the interview, and I maybe want to ask you first before I actually need to come up with an answer myself. But what was really one takeaway that you have from this interview, and what are you really going to kind of hold with you as we continue the rest of our year of training?
That is a wonderful question. I feel like he had so many interesting things to share. But maybe the most significant thing I'm going to take away from the interview is just this idea of being yourself, being authentic, and being genuine. We talked about sometimes there's a need in therapy or in psychology for professionals to put out a certain persona. And I think I was very caught up in that when I first started my graduate training. And listening to him talk and just observing just how genuine and honest he is just in every interaction that we've had with him over email, over Zoom, it kind of gives me the courage to just be myself, be authentic, and not worry so much about being this really polished professional.
Mm-hmm. I feel very similarly. In my mind, I've really split off these two different aspects of myself, the professional side and the personal side. And I don't know if it has to be that way, because though he is very warm, though he is very open and honest, I think that what I oftentimes forget is that your professional life can look like that too. It doesn't have to be two different things. And I'm still really trying to integrate those two parts of myself, essentially the professional and the personal side. And I don't know if they have to be separate. I think they can be the same thing. And I'm still trying to figure out what that looks like for me. But the way that he described it was, it is good to be professional, but within that professionalism is honesty, is kind of authenticity. So it doesn't have to be two different things.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I think even the way I described, or even the way I responded to that question, Carli, kind of showed the dualistic thinking, right? Like professional versus personal life. And you're so right. I think you can be an authentic professional without having to split your identity into.
Yeah, he actually clarified or confronted when I'd asked that question, and it was eye-opening for me, because it's so hard for me to see that they're the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like we're brought into our program thinking that they have to be two different things, but I don't know if they are. And maybe that's something we can discuss in future episodes about what that looks like, what professionalism looks like, especially as trainees just starting off. It might be an important conversation to have down the road.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah, we think this interview was just eye-opening, really fun. I had a lot of fun with this interview, and so I hope that our listeners have just as much fun with it. I hope that you all enjoy it just as much as we did.
Hello, Unconventional Dyad podcast listeners. We are so excited that you are joining the conversation with us. If you're liking what you're hearing and you would like to support the podcast, there are a few different ways to do that. We have a Patreon page now, so if you visit patreon.com/unconventionaldyad, you can support us through 4 different support tiers. You can also support us through the Anchor app. There's a support function, and you can choose from 3 different tiers, from as little as 99 cents per month. We really hope that you are liking the content so far. You can also check out our website where we post weekly blogs that you can comment on, and we hope that you join in the conversation with us. Let us know what you think.